The envelope sat on my workbench for 3 weeks, gathering dust and motor oil stains while my world fell apart around me. The elegant handwriting on the front read, "For Catalina, open when you need hope most." I thought it was just a sentimental gesture from a grateful customer. I had no idea it contained the key to a family secret that would change everything. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, what's the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you? Drop it in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more amazing stories every day. Now let's go back to the day that started it all. The morning everything changed started like any other terrible day at Restrepo Auto Repair. The ancient coffee maker was broken again, the hydraulic lift was making that grinding noise that meant expensive repairs, and I was staring at a stack of overdue bills that seemed to grow taller every time I looked away. 3 months behind on rent. 2 months behind on the equipment loan. The parts supplier had put me on cash-only terms, and my cash was running dangerously low. The small auto shop that had been in my family for 2 generations was dying a slow, painful death, and I was powerless to stop it. I'd inherited the business from my father, Miguel, when he passed away 2 years earlier. He'd built Restrepo Auto Repair from nothing, working 16-hour days to establish a reputation for honest work and fair prices in our working-class neighborhood. But honest work and fair prices don't always pay the bills, especially when you're competing with chain shops and dealerships that can undercut your labor rates. The neighborhood had changed too. Young professionals were moving in, driving newer cars that needed specialized computer diagnostics I couldn't afford. The old-timers who'd been loyal customers for decades were aging out, and their children took their cars to the shiny new service centers in the suburbs. I was good at what I did. Better than good, actually. I could diagnose engine problems by sound, rebuild a transmission with my eyes closed, and coax life out of vehicles that other mechanics had written off as hopeless. But being skilled didn't matter if you couldn't afford to keep the lights on. That Tuesday morning in October, I was under the hood of Mrs. Brown's ancient Honda Civic, trying to figure out why it was running rough, when I heard the distinctive sound of a car in distress pulling up outside. The engine was knocking badly, and I could hear the telltale wheeze of a failing water pump. I wiped my hands on my coveralls and walked outside to see a pristine 1985 Mercedes-Benz 300D diesel sedan sitting in front of my shop, steam rising from under its hood. The car was immaculate, the kind of vehicle that had been lovingly maintained for decades, with original paint that still gleamed and chrome that reflected the morning sun. Behind the wheel sat an elderly woman who looked as elegant as her car. She had silver hair styled in a perfect bob, wore a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than I made in a month, and had the kind of posture that spoke of old money and good breeding. She looked completely out of place in my gritty neighborhood, like a swan that had accidentally landed in a parking lot. She was also clearly distressed. Her hands were gripping the steering wheel, and even from a distance I could see the worry lines creasing her forehead. I approached the car slowly, not wanting to startle her.
"Excuse me, ma'am," I said gently. "Are you having car trouble?" She looked up at me with eyes that were a startling shade of blue, and for a moment I was struck by how much she reminded me of my grandmother, Abuela Rosa. Not in appearance. Abuela had been small and dark, while this woman was tall and fair, but in the way she carried herself, with dignity, even in distress. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, her voice cultured but shaky. "I'm afraid my car has overheated. I was driving to visit a friend, and suddenly there was steam everywhere. I pulled over here because I saw your sign." I looked at the Mercedes more closely. The temperature gauge was pegged in the red zone, and coolant was dripping steadily onto the asphalt. "Let me take a look. Pop the hood for me." The problem was immediately obvious. The water pump had failed catastrophically, and the serpentine belt had shredded when the pump seized. It was a common issue with these older Mercedes diesels, but not a cheap fix. The parts alone would run several $100s, and that was if I could find them quickly. "Well?" the woman asked, having gotten out of the car to stand beside me. Up close, I could see that she was probably in her 80s, but she moved with the grace of someone much younger. "Your water pump has failed," I explained. "The belt is destroyed too. It's not a quick fix, I'm afraid. You're looking at several hours of work, and the parts are expensive for this model." "Oh dear, I don't suppose there's any way to make it drivable? Just to get home?" I shook my head. "I'm sorry, but if you try to drive it like this, you'll destroy the engine. These old diesels are tough, but they can't run without coolant." She stood there for a moment, looking lost and vulnerable. She kept glancing around the neighborhood as if she was trying to figure out where she was, and I realized she was probably not from this part of town. The nearest Mercedes dealership was 20 miles away, and calling a tow truck would cost a fortune. "Ma'am, I made a decision that my accountant would have called insane. Why don't you come inside and have a cup of coffee while I see what I can do?" "Oh, I couldn't impose." "It's no imposition, and honestly, you remind me of my grandmother. She would have wanted someone to help you." I led her into the small office area of my shop, which doubled as a waiting room. It wasn't much: a couple of mismatched chairs, a coffee pot that was older than I was, and walls covered with automotive calendars and family photos. But it was clean, and the coffee was strong. "This is very kind of you," she said, settling into one of the chairs with the careful movements of someone whose bones weren't as young as they used to be. "I'm Vivian Blackwood, by the way. Catalina Restrepo. And it's not kind, it's just what you do for people." While Vivian sipped her coffee, I went to work on her Mercedes. I had a used water pump in my parts inventory that would fit, and I managed to find a belt that was close enough to work temporarily. It wasn't a perfect repair, but it would get her home safely. The problem was, I couldn't afford to give away parts and labor. I was already operating on such thin margins that every job had to pay for itself. But looking at this elderly woman, sitting alone in my shabby waiting room, I couldn't bring myself to charge her full price. I worked for 3 hours, replacing the water pump and belt, flushing the cooling system, and checking for any other damage. The Mercedes purred to life like it was brand new, the temperature gauge settling into the normal range. "All done," I announced, walking back into the office. "She's running perfectly now." Vivian's face lit up with relief. "Oh, wonderful. What do I owe you?" This was the moment I should have handed her a bill for $600. Instead, I found myself saying, "Don't worry about it. Just drive carefully and keep an eye on that temperature gauge." "I beg your pardon?" "No charge," I said. "Consider it a good deed for the day." Vivian stared at me in disbelief. "Young lady, you can't possibly work for free. This is your business, your livelihood." "Sometimes you do things because they're right, not because they're profitable," I said, echoing something my father used to say. Vivienne was quiet for a long moment, studying my face with those piercing blue eyes. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, cream-colored paper, expensive-looking, with my name written on it in elegant script. "I can't accept your generosity without giving something in return," she said, pressing the envelope into my hands. "But I want you to promise me something. Don't open this until you need hope more than anything else in the world. Will you promise me that?" It was an odd request, but there was something in her voice that made me nod. "I promise." "Good." She smiled then, and it transformed her entire face. "You're a remarkable young woman, Catalina Restrepo. Your grandmother would be very proud." I walked her out to her car, which was running smoothly now. As she prepared to drive away, she rolled down the window. "That envelope," she said. "When the time comes, you'll know. Trust me." And then she was gone, the Mercedes disappearing around the corner like something from a dream. I stood there for a moment, holding the mysterious envelope and wondering what had just happened. Then reality crashed back in.
I'd just given away $600 worth of work to a complete stranger, and I couldn't afford to give away 6 cents. But somehow, I didn't regret it. There had been something about Vivian Blackwood that reminded me not just of my grandmother, but of why my father had always said that being a mechanic was about more than fixing cars. It was about helping people. I tucked the envelope into my desk drawer and tried to forget about it. I had bills to pay and a business to save, and mysterious envelopes weren't going to help with either. The next 3 weeks were a nightmare of mounting pressure and dwindling options. My landlord, Mr. Murray, started calling daily about the overdue rent. The bank rejected my application for a business loan, citing insufficient collateral and poor cash flow projections. 2 of my regular customers took their cars elsewhere after I couldn't fix them quickly enough because I couldn't afford the parts. The final blow came on a Thursday afternoon when Mrs. Brown picked up her Honda. I'd managed to get it running, but the repair had taken longer than expected because I'd had to wait for a part to come in. She paid me, but she wasn't happy about the delay. "I'm sorry, Catalina," she said, not meeting my eyes, "but I think I'm going to start taking my car to that new place on Fifth Street. They have all the modern equipment and they can get parts faster." Mrs. Brown had been one of my father's first customers. Losing her felt like losing a piece of family history. That evening, I sat in my office going through the books one more time, hoping I'd made a mistake somewhere, that the numbers weren't as bad as they seemed, but they were worse. I was 3 months behind on the rent, 2 months behind on the equipment loan, and I owed money to half a dozen suppliers. Even if I worked every day for the next month without taking a salary, I couldn't catch up. The phone rang, and I answered it with a heavy heart, expecting another creditor. "Miss Restrepo, this is Murray Property Management. I'm calling about the rent on your commercial space." "Mr. Murray, I know I'm behind, but if you could just give me another week." "I'm afraid that's not possible. We've been more than patient, but 3 months is our limit. You have until Friday to bring the account current, or we'll have to begin eviction proceedings." Friday. That was tomorrow. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my shop, surrounded by the tools and equipment my father had worked so hard to buy. The smell of motor oil and metal shavings that had been the scent of home my entire life now felt like the smell of failure. I thought about calling my cousin Robert, who'd offered to buy the business from me 6 months ago. He wanted to turn it into a tire shop, said there was more money in tires than in repairs. It would mean the end of Restrepo Auto Repair, but at least I'd have enough money to pay off my debts and start over somewhere else. That's when I remembered the envelope. I pulled it out of my desk drawer, where it had been sitting for 3 weeks, gathering dust and the occasional coffee ring stain. The elegant handwriting seemed to mock me. "For Catalina, open when you need hope most." Well, I thought grimly, if this wasn't the moment when I needed hope most, I couldn't imagine what would be. I tore open the envelope with hands that were shaking from exhaustion and stress. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper, folded around something small and metallic. I unfolded the paper and gasped. It was a key, an old-fashioned brass key, the kind that might open a door or a chest, but it was the letter that made my heart stop. My dearest Catalina, if you are reading this, then you have reached the moment when hope seems impossible. I know this feeling well, for I have lived with it for 60 years. You do not know me, but I know you. I have been searching for you and your family for longer than you have been alive. You see, my dear child, I am your great-grandmother. My name is Vivian Blackwood, but I was born Vivian Restrepo. I am the mother of your grandfather, Carlos Restrepo, who I was forced to give up for adoption in 1943, when I was just 16 years old. I have spent the last 60 years trying to find him and his family. When I saw the name Restrepo Auto Repair on your shop sign, my heart nearly stopped. I made inquiries, and when I learned that the owner was a young woman named Catalina, daughter of Miguel, granddaughter of Carlos, I knew I had found my family at last. The car trouble was not entirely accidental. I have been driving past your shop for weeks, trying to work up the courage to introduce myself. When I saw you working under the hood of that Honda, so focused and skilled, I knew you were my descendant. My father was a mechanic too, you know. It runs in our blood. The key in this envelope opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown, box number 1247. Inside, you will find documents that prove our relationship, as well as information about a property I own in the countryside. It has been sitting empty for years, waiting for the right person to claim it. There is also a workshop there, built by my father in the 1950s. It has been maintained but unused, filled with tools and equipment that belonged to him. I think you will find it interesting. I am old, my dear, and I do not have much time left. But I have enough time to get to know my great-granddaughter if she will have me. My phone number is at the bottom of this letter. You are not alone, Catalina. You never were. With all my love, your great-grandmother, Vivian Blackwood.
I read the letter 3 times before the words sank in. Then I read it again, looking for some sign that it was a joke or a scam or a mistake. But the key was real, solid and warm in my palm. And something deep in my chest, some instinct I didn't understand, told me it was true. Vivian Blackwood was my great-grandmother. The elegant woman whose car I'd fixed for free was family I'd never known existed. I sat in my office until well past midnight, holding the letter and the key, trying to process what I'd learned. My grandfather Carlos had been adopted. That much I knew. He'd told my father that he'd never known his birth parents, but we'd always assumed they were dead or that they'd simply abandoned him. The idea that my great-grandmother had been alive all this time, searching for us, was almost too much to comprehend. The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time job at the parts store and drove downtown to First National Bank. My hands were shaking as I presented the key and the letter to the bank manager, a middle-aged woman named Mrs. Hoffman, who looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. Box 1247, she said, checking her records. Yes, that's been rented by Mrs. Blackwood for, goodness, nearly 40 years. She comes in every few months to check on it. Are you a relative? Her great-granddaughter, I said, the words feeling strange in my mouth. Mrs. Hoffman led me to the vault, a sterile room lined with safety deposit boxes. Box 1247 was larger than I'd expected, and when she opened it with her master key and my key, I saw it was packed with documents, photographs, and what looked like legal papers. I'll give you some privacy, Mrs. Hoffman said, leading me to a small room with a table and chair. I spread the contents of the box across the table, my heart pounding. There were birth certificates, adoption papers, and a thick folder labeled property documents. But it was the photographs that made me gasp. There were dozens of them, spanning decades. Pictures of a young woman who looked remarkably like me, standing next to a tall, dark-haired man in mechanic's coveralls. Pictures of the same man working on cars in what looked like a professional garage. Pictures of a baby, my grandfather Carlos. She'd been searching for him. For decades, she'd been trying to find the son she'd been forced to give up. The property documents were even shocking. Vivian owned a 50-acre estate about an hour outside the city, complete with a main house, several outbuildings, and something called Restrepo Automotive Workshop. According to the papers, the property was worth well over $1 million. And according to a will that was also in the box, it was all being left to me. I called the phone number at the bottom of Vivian's letter with trembling fingers. Hello. Her voice was exactly as I remembered, pulchured, warm, with just a hint of uncertainty. Vivian, this is Catalina. I opened the envelope. There was a long pause, and then I heard what sounded like a sob of relief. Ah, my dear child.
I was so hoping you would call. Did you go to the bank? I'm there now. Vivian, I don't understand. The property, the workshop. Why didn't you just tell me who you were when I fixed your car? Because I was terrified, simply. I've been searching for my family for 60 years, and I was afraid that if I told you the truth, you might not believe me, or worse, that you might not want anything to do with an old woman who gave up her child. But you didn't give him up by choice. No, but I've carried the guilt of it my entire life. When I saw you working on my car, so skilled and dedicated, I knew you were my blood, but I needed to know what kind of person you were before I revealed myself. And fixing your car for free was some kind of test? Not a test, Vivian said gently. A confirmation. I already knew you were family. Your kindness just proved that you were the kind of family I'd hoped to find. We talked for another hour, and Vivian told me the story I'd never known. She'd been 16 when she got pregnant with my grandfather, the daughter of a wealthy family who'd disowned her when they discovered her condition. The father of her child, my great-grandfather, had been a mechanic named Antonio Restrepo, and they'd planned to marry despite her family's objections. But Antonio had been killed in a workplace accident before the wedding could take place, and Vivian's family had forced her to give up the baby for adoption. I've been looking for Carlos ever since, she said. But by the time I found him, he'd already passed away. I was devastated. I thought I'd lost my chance forever. But then I learned he'd had a son, Miguel, who'd had a daughter. You. Why didn't you contact my father? I tried, she said sadly, but he died just a month before I found him. I was too late again. We arranged to meet that afternoon at the property she'd mentioned in her letter. I closed the shop early, not that I had any customers anyway, and drove out to the address she'd given me. The estate was breathtaking. A long tree-lined driveway led to a beautiful colonial-style house surrounded by rolling hills and mature oak trees. But it was the building behind the house that made me stop the car and stare. It was a professional automotive workshop, easily twice the size of my current shop, with modern bay doors and what looked like state-of-the-art equipment. A sign over the main entrance read, Restrepo Automotive Workshop, Est 1952. Vivian was waiting for me on the front porch of the house, and when she saw me, she smiled with such joy that I felt tears spring to my eyes. "Welcome home, my dear," she said, embracing me with surprising strength. "Welcome to your inheritance." She gave me a tour of the property, explaining that she'd bought it in the 1960s and had the workshop built as a tribute to Antonio, my great-grandfather. I always hoped that someday one of his descendants would use it. I just never imagined it would be his great-granddaughter. The workshop was incredible. It had hydraulic lifts, computerized diagnostic equipment, a paint booth, and tool sets that were worth more than my entire current inventory. There were also several vintage cars in various stages of restoration, projects that Antonio had started before his death and that Vivian had preserved. "This is all yours now," she said, watching me run my hands over a pristine 1967 Mustang. The property, the workshop, the equipment, everything. "I can't accept this," I said, overwhelmed. "It's too much." "Nonsense," Vivian said firmly. "This is your birthright. Your great-grandfather didn't have the chance to use it. Someone needs to give life to it. Besides," she added with a twinkle in her eye, "I'm 83 years old. What am I going to do with a car restoration business?" Over the next few hours, Vivian told me stories about Antonio, about their brief but passionate love affair, about the dreams they'd shared of building something together. She showed me photographs of him working on cars, and I was struck by how much he looked like my father, like me.
He would have been so proud of you, she said, as we sat in the workshop, surrounded by the tools he'd collected. A woman mechanic, running her own business, carrying on the family tradition. He always believed that skill was more important than gender. What happens now? I asked. Now you save your business, Vivian said practically. I've already spoken to my lawyer. The property transfer can be completed within a week. You can sell this place if you want, use the money to pay off your debts and expand your current shop. Or you can move your business here. There's plenty of space, and this location is actually better for attracting customers from the suburbs. You could specialize in classic car restoration, something this area desperately needs. The idea was tempting, but also terrifying. I don't know anything about running a business this size. You learn, Vivian said confidently, and you won't be doing it alone. I may be old, but I still have my wits about me. I can help with the business side of things, and I have connections in the classic car community. That evening, I drove back to my shop with my head spinning. In the space of a single day, I'd gone from facing bankruptcy to inheriting $1 million property. It felt like a dream, too good to be true. But when I walked into my shabby little shop with its ancient equipment and overdue bills, I knew it was real. I spent the weekend going through the legal documents Vivian had given me, making sure everything was legitimate. It was. The property was real, the inheritance was real, and most importantly, the family connection was real. On Monday morning, I called Mr. Murray and told him I'd have his rent money by the end of the week. Then I called my cousin Robert and told him the tire shop deal was off. The property transfer took exactly 1 week, just as Vivian had promised. On the day I signed the papers, she handed me another envelope, this one containing the deed to the estate and a check for $50,000. Operating capital, she explained when I protested. You'll need money to move your equipment and get the new shop running. Moving Restrepo Auto Repair from the city to the countryside was like transplanting a struggling plant into rich soil. Within a month, I had twice as many customers as I had before, drawn by word-of-mouth recommendations and the novelty of a female mechanic who specialized in both modern repairs and classic restorations. Vivian was true to her word about helping with the business side of things. She had a network of contacts in the classic car world, and soon I was getting calls from collectors who had heard about the new Restrepo Automotive Workshop. The vintage cars that had been sitting in the shop became my first restoration projects, and the before and after photos attracted even more customers. But more than the business success, I treasured getting to know my great-grandmother. She moved into the main house on the property, and we fell into a routine of having dinner together every evening, sharing stories about our lives and our family. She told me about Antonio, about the plans they'd made and the dreams they'd shared. I told her about my father, about the lessons he taught me and the values he'd instilled. We were bridging a gap of 60 years, connecting 2 generations that had been separated by tragedy and circumstance. 6 months after that first meeting, Restrepo Automotive Workshop was thriving. I'd hired 2 employees, expanded into custom fabrication work, and had a waiting list of customers that stretched 3 months out. The financial stress that had nearly destroyed me was gone, replaced by the satisfaction of doing work I loved in a place that honored my family's legacy. But the greatest gift wasn't the business success or the financial security. It was the family I'd found. Vivian and I had become inseparable. 2 women from different generations, united by our love of cars and our shared determination to honor the memory of the man who'd brought us together. 1 year after I'd opened that mysterious envelope, we held a celebration at the workshop. Customers, friends, and family gathered to commemorate the first anniversary of the new Restrepo Automotive Workshop. Vivian gave a speech about family, legacy, and the power of never giving up hope. "A year ago," she said, standing in front of the sign that bore our family name, I was a lonely old woman who'd spent 60 years searching for something I thought I'd lost forever. Today, I'm surrounded by family and friends, watching my great-granddaughter carry on a tradition that began with her great-grandfather. She looked at me with eyes that sparkled with pride and love. Catalina didn't just inherit a business from me, she gave me something far more valuable. She gave me a family. As the celebration continued around us, I thought about the chain of events that had brought us together. A broken-down Mercedes, a decision to help a stranger, an envelope that sat unopened for 3 weeks. Any one of those things could have gone differently, and we might never have found each other. But sometimes, I realized, the universe conspires to bring people together. Sometimes kindness is rewarded in ways we never expect. And sometimes the family we're looking for has been looking for us too. The envelope that seemed like such a small thing, a gesture from a grateful customer, had contained the key to everything I'd never known I was missing. A family history, a legacy, and most importantly, a great-grandmother who'd never stopped believing that love could transcend time and circumstance. As I watched Vivian laughing with our customers, sharing stories about the cars we'd restored and the dreams we'd fulfilled, I understood what she'd meant about the universe having a plan. My father had always said that being a mechanic was about more than fixing cars. It was about helping people. I'd helped a stranger with a broken-down car, and in return, she'd helped me fix a broken family legacy that had been waiting 60 years to be restored. An absolutely beautiful story about family, legacy, and how sometimes our greatest gifts come from the people we least expect. What's the kindest thing a stranger has ever done for you that changed your life? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story of family connections, second chances, and the power of kindness touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories about the bonds that unite us. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.